go ahead and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. And I'm actually going to introduce my husband and co-executive director, Derek Singletary, who unfortunately, because he is in state prison, he can't join us live tonight, but he did record a few remarks just to kick things off for us. So just give me a second and I'm going to go ahead and get that set up. Perhaps. Because for some reason I don't seem to have the ability to share my screen, even though I'm the host.
Pass it over here. You might have to take it back.
No, it says I am the host. Oh, there we go. I got it. And then the other part I always forget is to also share audio. So, all right, here we go. Here are opening remarks from Derek.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Attica Still Means Fight Back. I'm Derek Singletary, co-founder and co-executive director of Unchained, and I'll be one of your hosts for tonight as we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Attica riots. As you can see on your screen, I won't be present today. That's because I'm currently incarcerated. And as an incarcerated individual, there are none of us who benefit from the sacrifices of the Attica riots like us here on the inside. Reforms like more regular showers, the recognition of Islam, contact visits, prisoner legal services, and the inmate liaison committees were revolutionary changes of their time, but Attica still means fight back. The Attica Brothers and all the comrades who fought for their rights and died for ours planted the first seeds to take root not only in the system, but in the minds of citizens watching across the nation, gradually developing into new allies and avenues with which to fight. Now, 50 years later, the seeds from the riots have grown into a strong, young tree full of powerful branches, evidenced by you all here in attendance, and advocacy organizations like Unchained, which continues to work by taking their unmet demands and bringing them a step further. Today, the Attica Brothers' unmet demands will finally be met as we at Unchained, along with our partners, the Counsel Center for Equity, Health, and Justice, and A Little Piece of Life, drafted the Less is More Community Supervision Revocation Reform Act and led the statewide campaign to make it law. This bill, sponsored by then Senator Brian Benjamin, now New York's Lieutenant Governor, congratulations, and Assemblywoman Farrah Soufont Forrest, was passed by the New York State Legislature on June 10th, and we expect it to be signed presently by Governor Kathy Hochul and to take effect by March 1st, 2022. They will fulfill some of the unmet demands of the brothers by preventing thousands of people every year from being returned to prison for non-criminal technical parole violations. It guarantees everyone accused of a parole violation the right to counsel at their revocation hearing. It also speeds up the hearings while shifting their location into the community to ensure that witnesses and loved ones will be able to support the accused. But Attica still means fight back. And so we've taken it even further, capping the amount of jail time that reincarcerated individuals can do on a violation and rewarding every 30 days done without a violation with a corresponding 30 days off parole. But Attica still means fight back because the police and correction officers are still abusing, assaulting, and murdering our people and getting away with it. On the inside, our families are constantly treated with both blatant and veiled disrespect in order to discourage them from supporting us. Correction officers use Jim Crow tactics to pit us against each other while using violence and the threat of violence to discourage, intimidate, and confuse us from seeing them as the true oppressors. And because the department is allowed to investigate itself, there are cover-ups at every level. So the work of Attica Brothers was just the beginning, and this is why Attica still means fight back. Today on our program, we're delighted to have the likes of Dr. Heath Thompson, a historian at the University of Michigan and the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Blood in the Water, the Attica Prison Uprising of 1971 and its legacy. She is a highly sought-after speaker who has appeared on the PBS NewsHour, CBS Sunday Morning, The Daily Show, and countless other television and radio programs. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. We have Counselor Joe Heath, the General Counsel for the Onondaga Nation. He began representing the Attica Brothers during his first year of law school at the University of Buffalo in 1971 and continued until the settlement was reached 29 years later. He then went on to assist Dr. Thompson with her book, which she spent 13 years researching and writing. Thank you, Mr. Heath. And last but certainly not least, the legendary Syracusean Bobby Harrison, a boxing great who is the co-founder of the Faith Hope Community Center in Syracuse, a boxing gym that also helps young people with school and life skills. He was in the yard in 1971 and survived. We are very honored to have Dr. Thompson with us, and as a Syracuse-based organization, proud to highlight the role of people from Syracuse in a landmark event that forever changed the course of social movement. Thank you all for attending. This is Attica Still Means Fight Back.
So Derek recorded this maybe about 10 days ago, and that was before the governor had signed the bill, the Less is More Act, into law, which she just did on Friday. So we are still celebrating that victory along with our partners at Catal and A Little Piece of Light. And we are just very honored to play a small part in carrying on the legacy of the Attica Brothers and honoring the sacrifices that they made. So please continue to drop comments in the chat if you want to, and put your questions in the Q&A, and we will try to get to everything after our panelists speak. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Heath Thompson.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Derek and Emily and Unchained. And I am so honored to be here with Bobby and Joe. And this is really incredible. It has been an incredible commemoration of the 50th to have so much time to get to spend with so many of the Attica Brothers and so many of the lawyers like Joe who have spent this last couple of months really taking this time to remind everybody how important this struggle has been. And Derek just did such an amazing job of reminding us what the legacy of all of this has been. I thought maybe what I would do is just maybe for folks, I doubt probably everybody on this Zoom needs reminding, but maybe for those, if there is anyone who does, take a few minutes to just walk us through what some of those moments of this rebellion were, some of the moments that made this so important, and walk through some of these photographs, some of these kind of pivotal moments that we now commemorate, so that we can then get on to the much more important business of hearing Bobby talk, and then turning over to people's questions and getting on to the much more important discussion. I'm going to share my screen just for a second so I can get on to the slides and share some thoughts here, which is where, here we are. Share. Okay, and I'm going to go to play from the start. I think what I really want to share with everybody is just this bigger question about why does this uprising matter so much? And again, I think this group here, I think, knows this. And I think our job is to make sure that everybody on this planet understands why this matters so much. You know, this is Attica, and the sad truth is that Attica is still there today. It is still operational today. And we'll talk a little bit about that. What does it mean that Attica is still operational today? There's certainly a lot of people that are working hard to make sure that it's not. I know that Alliance for Families for Justice has been working hard to try to shut it down still today, but it is still there. And this is what it looked like back in 1971. And it actually looks the same way today, built during the Great Depression. And in 1971, this was a place that was in serious trouble. The folks walking the yard with the stick knew it was in trouble. The folks locked inside knew it was in trouble. People were being fed on 63 cents a day. People didn't have enough to eat. People had too few showers. People had too little toilet paper. People couldn't see their children enough. People weren't outside of the cell enough. People couldn't read enough. People weren't treated as humanely enough. People weren't simply recognized as the human beings that they were enough. And everybody in this place were making clear what it would take to bring simply a modicum of humanity into this place by working through the system, doing what we're told every day we're supposed to do, write letters, tell people what you need, you know, do it the way you're supposed to do it. But nobody responded. Nobody did anything. Nobody did the basics that human beings need to get up every day and simply serve the sentences that juries had given everybody in that place. And so eventually folks erupt. And on September 9th, that's exactly what people did. And one of the most extraordinary human rights rebellions then happens. And some of these pictures reflect what is really extraordinary about this human rights rebellion. There is a medical tent. There is, you know, a food distribution system. People are elected to speak out of each of the cell blocks. People stand up at a negotiating table where everything is translated into Spanish so that folks can understand what is transpiring up at that negotiating table. The media is brought in. And why is this important? Because prisons are shut off from the American people, even though this is what the American people pay for every single day, and yet can't know what's going on behind those bars. And so the media is brought in, observers are brought in. Basically, the veil is lifted, what is going on the inside. And this goes on for 4 long days and nights, negotiations with people looking on, people like Bill Counsel up here on the left, and Clarence Jones from the Amsterdam News in Harlem, and Tom Wicker from the New York Times, and negotiations going on all day and all night. And not just negotiations, but negotiations going on with actually the head of DOCS, the head of the Department of Corrections, and not negotiations unequally, but negotiations men to men, talking about what is needed and what will not be taken anything less than. And the thing is, though, that meanwhile, while these 4 days and 4 nights of negotiations are going on outside, over 600 state troopers are descending on this same facility, and Parks Police and Genesee County sheriffs and deputy sheriffs and off-duty corrections officers. And meanwhile, the FBI is feeding rumors to these people of all kinds of stuff going on the inside that is not happening. And this is happening at the same time. And this is happening unchecked. This is being encouraged. People are passing out weapons like candy. People are not writing down who has what weapon. People don't, in fact, the guys who are trying desperately to do this are being told to rip it up. Nobody cares what's happening. In fact, it's being encouraged. This is the guy that can do something about it. This is the guy that can show up. He can, if he can't give what people need, which is amnesty, if he can't take this the last mile to save people's lives, because everything else has basically been settled. 28 out of 33 demands have already been agreed upon. This thing can settle. This thing must settle. People's lives depend on it. Not just the folks inside who were there serving time, but actually this guy's State employees are also in there. Everybody's lives depend on it. And you know what? His guys are telling him that this thing must settle peacefully. Actually, the head of the military, who are his guys, are telling him, you know what? If you go in forcefully, you're going to actually kill your own employees. We don't find this actually out until 2016, but we now know that he is told point blank, you will kill your own men if you go in there. But he says, you know what? It's okay. I'm going to do it anyway. Because he knows that this is what he's unleashing. And he knows that the cost is going to be a massacre. He's actually told that word, massacre. That word is told to him. And on that fifth morning, that is what he unleashes. He unleashes first a helicopter that puts gas over that yard, gas that already incapacitates everybody. It's not just a gas, that's actually the wrong word, because a gas gives you the idea that it's just kind of a fog, right? It just gives you the idea that it's in the air. No, it's actually a powder. It actually clings to people's mucous membranes. It actually gets in their noses, it gets in their eyes, it gets down their throat. It makes you actually sick. It makes you vomit. It makes it so you can't see. It makes it so you can't breathe. It actually mowed people down. And that is at the moment when actually the law enforcement goes in. It is when there is no longer any reason for law enforcement to go in that they go in. And then, of course, it is carnage. And I won't dwell on the picture of carnage, but needless to say, it is carnage. It is 128 people shot. It is 39 men assassinated, 39 men mowed down, the incarcerated, the civilian and correction officer hostages alike. But then the state employees are as dispensable as the incarcerated at that moment, because of course what goes on is that these guys stand out in front of the prison and they tell the American public, by the way, the European public, all the public, because the media is out in front of this institution, they tell the world that something totally different happened. They say that the prisoners killed the hostages, that these animals did something that they can't even admit to have done themselves. And that story goes out on the front page of the New York Times. It goes out on the front page of the LA Times. It goes out on the front page of every small town newspaper in America, because it goes out on the UPI, it goes out on the AP. And if you all want to know how important this was, I can't underestimate to you how important this was, because actually, if you look at polling data in that moment, this nation actually was going in a slightly different direction. Actually, this nation was getting in the boarding the train of, you know what, we shouldn't warehouse people. We were moving in the direction of decarceration, not warehousing people. We were moving in the direction, yeah, maybe Miranda rights might be actually a good thing. Maybe the police have too much power. Maybe things like Kent State are not a good idea. Maybe Orangeburg is not the way to go. maybe we've gone too far, but no, we don't do that. And so this is pivotal. And in this day, this is what the American people are told. But of course, what's really going down inside of that prison is torture. I'm not going to dwell on the torture. We've seen enough of the torture. But you all know it's torture. The American people don't know it's torture, and we don't know because the investigations aren't about the torture. The investigations are about everything that the prisoners have done wrong, not law enforcement, the prisoners. Now, luckily, and this matters as much as this. Luckily, not all the American people know the lies. Luckily, there's always been everybody else who knows what's going down, because not everybody believed it. Folks inside kept telling what was going on. Folks inside kept insisting on being truth tellers, what was going on. People like Joe Heath, who is here, also kept insisting on telling the truth. And so the justice struggle was always there too. And even though 62 men were indicted on all of these felony indictments, they were beaten back. They were resisted in one of the most extraordinary legal defense efforts in American history, one that you also need to know about, one that is as powerful as the story of the state violence. And that, plus the civil trial that will go on for 25, 29 years, actually, is one of the most extraordinary parts of this story too. And therefore, Attica's legacy is a dual legacy. Yes, it is a legacy of state violence, but it is also a legacy of extraordinary resistance, extraordinary standing up for the principle that everybody that is behind bars remains a human being, no matter what the state would like anyone else to believe. And that is the legacy of Attica. And that's why 50 years later, even though these prisons still exist, and even though they are still hellholes, because we got lied to, because we got sent down that wrong path, because we were not telling our own history in places like the New York Times, we can now. The justice struggle did matter. We're now correcting that record 50 years later. The justice struggle is still in play. We got the next 50 years to get it right. So now I'm going to turn it over to the people who will tell you a million other reasons why Attica matters 50 years moving forward. And I'm going to stop sharing now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. And with that, we're going to turn it over to the man who was there in the yard, our Syracuse hometown hero, Mr. Bobby Harrison.
How you doing? Heather, thanks for the conversation. Emily, thank you for having me here tonight. And most of all, Emily, to your husband, he reminds me of his brother that Heather wrote about called George Jackson. He's one of the brothers of this era, George Jackson. I remember on the 13th of September, me and my wife, we rode up to Attica because I thought there was going to be an event for all of those of us who was damaged in Attica on the 13th of 1971. But when I got there, I felt Attica's stink and filth of the past still there because of those standing outside the walls when they visualized my wife and myself, who only came there out of respect for those of us who died, guards as well as prisoners. We was coming there to show our respect. And when we got there, we got the most unwelcoming feeling and disdain for another human being that I've felt since Attica itself, since that uprising, since all of that pain that brothers sacrificed. So I know they're still sacrificing behind those walls because the guys outside those walls who we not had confrontation with, but had those visual fights outside the wall, they're the prisoners of the correction officers of the day. So I know there's no difference of yesterday, some 50 years, and today. So Emily, again, I say to you, to your husband, stay focused, stay on your job, and it takes courage for a brother to speak out from within those walls about the hell that's going on there now, because these same things was happening 50 years ago. Brothers like George, and at that time, I think he was with a sister called Angela Davis, was doing things on the West Coast about teaching about prisons, about the sacrifices that men like myself went through. You know, I can't recall a brother in my lifetime ever saying they volunteered to go to prison. Most of the time when they go there for minor things that they turn into major things. And once you're in that prison system itself, it's like they describe us as animals and things like that. Sometimes the animal mentality is there, yes, because the system breaks a lot of us. So we turn to acting like animals at times because they treat us like animals. So it's the strong overpowering the weak. So the strong ones in jail take advantage of the weak ones in jail. And the prison system knows that if we can keep breaking them, they'll continue to break themselves. And there's so much pain behind those prison walls. I've seen this, I've lived this, and I've survived it. And that's why I think I'm here today to give my version of the hell prisons take guys like myself through. Just being in prison itself it's like in another world, another planet. Because those who are there to say, serve and protect, like police, the correction officers, most of them are demonized when they're seeing guys who look like myself, because they've never been around guys like myself on the outside world. Because in Attica, if there's a population of, say, 3,000, I would be willing to bet there's no more than 10 to 20 families that look like myself that might live in those surroundings and stuff like that. So they don't normally deal with people that look like me that much. So they don't have any compassion for us. And all they hear about us is the violence and stuff that goes in our communities and stuff like that. But then again, a lot of us are in prisons out here. We don't realize it until they put us behind walls and stuff, that we're still shackled up out here, and they turn us on each other. And just like in today's time, they have these young kids to label themselves as gangs. And once you label these young kids and give them that title, after a while, they stop believing this and they start doing gang mentality type things, like killing each other. Since 1978, my last time to go into prison, which I shouldn't have been going to prison, but I was set up and framed to go there because I became a vehicle of the community to try to straighten a whole lot of this BS that's going on in our communities out. And once you begin to say, be a positive person in your community, especially the community I live in throughout the United States, not only my community, but any Black community. If you're Black and you try to stand up for the community, you become the enemy for sure then. And I've lived that life. And I've been told many times I wouldn't have lived to be 25 or 30 years old, but here I am at 73 talking to you here today. I've seen the hate and the pain that goes on in communities that look like mine. But I also know the only way these things will change is people like myself got to speak up and speak out. Just like your husband, Emily, you know, he's speaking up and he's speaking out. But have him to remember, he's in their house and he's being watched and he's being monitored. You know, they said that George Jackson smuggled a gun back inside from a visit from Angela Davis. Impossible. But the world believed that, just like they believe the Attica Brothers killed the prisoners, cut their throats. That's what we're told. Then come to find out, friendly fire killed them. But still yet today, no one wants to tell the truth about what happened. And all we as prisoners wanted was to be treated like human beings, that's all. We weren't asking, we know we had to commit some type wrong to be placed where we had. So we know we've been penalized by being taken away from our families. But then once we get there, the way they treat us in there, make us a lot of times come back again, because we've been treated, once you're there, you're treated like animals in a cage. So you act like animals in a cage, you get let out. So once you get let out of a cage of an animal, you go out back to your community acting wild and in savagery. So you're coming right back again. But if you at a young age, like I was at 21 or 22, you don't realize that all you want to do is get back at someone, because these guys victimized you all the time you was there. So jail becomes a revolving door. And those in charge know that. Like I heard you guys speaking about Mr. Rockefeller. All the guys wanted was for him to come in and just talk to the prisoners and negotiators as human beings and give us an opportunity to say, just treat us like human beings. No one wanted to be treated special, just being treated like human beings. And for him not having the time to come, there were people that died. Not only people on my side of the fence, prisoners, but the prison guards. As they ran towards freedom, they were shot down like animals because they had the uniforms of the animals on, prisoners. We didn't kill them. I was a prisoner that day. I was no further than 10 yards away from where the officers was being held at. When the firing and shooting stopped, all the prisoners, they got loose because guys who were prisoners cut them loose from the ropes so they could go, run like us, give them a chance to live. Don't have them be sitting out there sitting ducks and getting shot. So as they ran towards freedom, talking about, we're one of y'all, the cops thought they was attacking them, so they killed them. because they thought they was us, because they had our coloring on. Just like the kids out in California, they judge each other by the colors of red and blue, you know, the blood and the Crips. That's what it became that particular day. The guys in green versus the guys in gray or blue who held the guns. We didn't have no guns. We was like sitting ducks, and they was killing us. And all the reason then we was convicts. We didn't matter. We wasn't human beings, and they treated us less as human beings and stuff like that. And it hurts me because on the day of this event, some 50 years later, I had planned on going up there saying something about a young gentleman who I met for 4 or 5 days of my life that meant a whole lot to me now that I look back, because he was our George Jackson on the East Coast, that George was on the West Coast. This young brother out of Rochester called Elliot Barkley. I remember talking to him every night after this event occurred, because he kept wanting to talk on the microphone. He wanted to speak to the brothers in Rochester, let them know that I'm LD, I'm okay, and I'm speaking out for guys like myself who LD wasn't a trained speaker, but he was a great speaker at that time. God got within his body and had him to, I guess, tell a story about how guys like us are being mistreated in this prison system. Not only in here in New York City, but throughout the whole United States. Because when George Jackson died, brothers like myself said, well, F it. If I'm gonna die trying. And I think when this beating took place in A Block, when that explosion came about, it was the end. So I had a choice that particular day. I was in C Block, I was at work in the metal shop. And I kept hearing these sirens. You know, I'd never been in a riot before. I'd never been in a prison when it was taken before. This is something new to me. But once I realized it was a riot, I had a choice. I could go to a cell and lock myself in with these other guys, and I think it was an E Block, they called it at that time, when everybody was running from C Block and the metal shop. Or I could join the crowd of saying, we're gonna stand up and make a difference where these things won't happen in this prison system again, where guys won't continuously be brutalized. I'm talking about brutalized. I seen some things with my eyes that day that brothers talk about Vietnam and all that stuff. I understand if you've been to the war, it's painful, it's hurt. I seen war up close in person. I remember crawling in mud, being told, if you look at us, you nigger, we'll kill you. And I walked and got running, I seen a pole, a club, sticking out men behind while they scream, and white guys standing on top about, you fucking niggers. You fucking niggers, as guys were screaming because they were sham those fucking poles up their asses and stuff. So now, if this war was any different than the other wars that they fought when guys had guns to shoot back with, I preferred to have been when those guys had opportunity to shoot back at people. We had no opportunity to shoot back. We were brutalized, dehumanized, and that whole same fear came over me again on the 13th of September, when all I did was went to I was going to give a few remarks about a brother who found himself in prison and died 4 days later, Elliot Barkley. I just want to tell the story of our George Jackson here on the East Coast. And I have my buddy here, Joe, you know, that's why I call him buddy, because, you know, it's not a lot of white folk came to our aid to say, represent us and fight for us, because still yet there's that dislike and that disdain for racism here in this country. You know, I went through the Jim Crow stuff. I came from the South. Like I said, I've seen things happen to my grandfather that was unreal, and his companions, how they was beaten and brutalized by the Klansmen. So I've seen that hate before. But I thought when we came up north, we had ran away from that stuff. We just became a more conservative version of the Klan in the South up here up north and stuff like that. And it's painful. It's painful for me to talk about it. But I hope, Emily, through brothers like your husband, who is still in the big house, monitor him and watch him, tell him to be aware. And it's not about winning victory points in there, because there's no victory points, Emily. I want you to understand this. Your husband's brave, but they got a noose around his neck, and they'll play with him and they'll make it look like he jumped and hung himself. So be aware and be prepared, because they don't play by rules, sis, not at all. And Heather, I read your book. On the book cover, and I seen the same book, there's some guys that was in the football helmets. That was me and my friend. So I know this pain, I know it well. Now, sometimes I wear it on a daily basis, because sometimes I can wake up in normality, then there's those bad days I get, because I never got any help from anyone or anybody about the Attica. They just released me a little early because I was a victim of the pain that the state of New York gave out. But they never give us no help with what's going on up here. Every time there's violence in my community now, I think about Attica. It's the first thing comes up my mind. I remember those days. And I said, God, I don't want to go back there and be encaged by these. They call us animals. Come time, I don't realize who the real animal was. Those who were watching us, or those of us who was in there, because a lot of times those who was in there act more civil than those supposed to be serving and protecting and being keepers of the jail. They became the beasts. And when you showed that picture of Attica a little while ago, 4 prisons within 1 prison, it reminded me of a modern day or old time plantation. No different than that. And when I went up there the other day with my wife on the 13th, like I said, hoping to have some words to say about L.A. to Berkeley, I realized now what apartheid meant. I realized what guys like Mandela went through over there in that country, who didn't like people like us in our own country, because they had the money, so they started buying everything up and became the gods of that universe. And the same thing here now today. If you don't have money to fight back with, you don't have a voice. And if you don't have no one who would voice for you to stand up for you, we're being stomped out. And I appreciate you guys having me here. And like I said, it's painful for me to talk, but I'm coming from my heart. I might sound a little different, I might sound a little emotional, and sometimes, yeah, and raised because I am. There was no reason for all of those people to die that day. I'm not just talking about prisoners, I'm talking about those 9 guards that died too. There was human beings also. But no one seemed to think that those other guys that died count. The only one that died was those 9 officers who lived in the community of Attica. And it wasn't like that. Everyone who got shot, I got shot. Everyone that felt that pain of the clubs, of the beatings and all that stuff, running through the glass of the gauntlet hallways, beaten down, being called niggers in ways that that they meant hate you, nigger. That's what we felt. That's my pain, that's my hurt. So like I said, I'm not gonna keep expressing my pain, because nothing can be done about my pain unless I really don't know, because it's been 50 some odd years and I haven't got any help yet. So I only hope that you guys who are speaking out for guys like myself who didn't have anyone to speak for them in the past, and I hope that someone hear my voice and say, well, this guy might be telling the truth, but if he's telling the truth about what he's saying, there's some wrong stuff that's going on in these prison systems, and it haven't changed. It haven't changed. And it's not gonna change until more of us get involved. Don't wait till your family members being shanghaied or locked up for 40 years for getting caught with a half an ounce of cocaine. Then the guys who get caught with 500 pounds of cocaine and boatloads, they get 2 years restrictions, not even probation, but 2 years slap on the wrist, because they come from family members who have money or have important positions and stuff like that. That's what the United States has become to be. Those who have, you don't have, you're not a United States citizen, stuff like that. I thank you guys for your time, and I hope you keep spreading the word about Attica's only a day away every day, because brothers are in there. They're in pain. They're suffering. I heard your husband speak. He's in pain. He knows what it's like to be in hell now and not knowing whether you're going to ever get out, because every day is a day of luck if you make it to the next day. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Bobby. It was so moving, and we really appreciate you, going back to that yard 50 years ago, despite the pain that it's obvious it's still causing you. And I also just want folks to know that every time I talk to Bobby, he asks me, how's your husband doing? Stay on top of your husband. Every conversation, he has expressed his concern for Derek and his admiration for Derek. And that just means so much to both of us. So thank you, Bobby.
You're more than welcome.
Pass that camera over to your comrade, Joe, there. And we're gonna turn things over to the people's lawyer, Joe Heath. Take it away, Joe.
Well, thank you, Emily. I'm honored to join Bobby every time I get a chance to do that. And honored to join Heather. The tremendous 13 years she put into researching and writing that book that helped us tell the truth about Attica. Just briefly, I was at third day of law school when Attica started. And on the 13th, when I heard more corporate tight law students talk about, oh, those savages slashed their throats, and there was something in me that knew that wasn't true. And so I stayed in law school, and the fact that all of us, hundreds and thousands of people that joined this resistance, have created the truth and helped the world know what really happened at Attica. As I've said before, I'll take that proudly to my grave. I want to really thank Emily and Derek and Unchained for the work to get that parole bill signed. For those of you who've never encountered parole, it's a vicious, dehumanizing system. And I remember in 1972, I worked with Herman Schwartz was one of the observers at Attica, and we worked to get a change in the regulations so that they had to give a reason when they denied parole. Before that, you would go to the parole board, you'd wait 2 years, you'd do everything you could. You go in there, denied. That's all. So parole should be abolished, and it certainly shouldn't be used as the excuse to reincarcerate people at a rate probably as high as courts do. So that's just a great achievement to have that bill passed and signed by our new governor. Thank you for that. Well, the elephant in the room here when we talk about Attica is racism. There was not one Black employee at Attica Prison in 1971. Not one non-white person in that assault force.
Not one.
The prisoners were 70% Black, brown, red, 70%. And so the racism, it took me a couple of years to figure this out, but I remember visiting the brothers in the box in 1972, and one of them explained, he said, this is just like slavery. And I thought at first, that's pretty extreme.
Just like.
But no, it's the same. And if you rebelled against slavery, if you ran away,
chop your limbs off.
They cut hands and feet and tongues, tortured to teach you not to rebel.
Don't fight back.
And that's exactly what happened in Attica on the 13th of September in 1971. As Bobby has said, as people were being made to crawl in the mud and subjected to so much other torture, the constant mantra of, you're going to die, nigger. You had your day. This is ours.
Just show you who boss.
And it continues today. And it's built upon, Bobby alluded to this earlier, apartheid in upstate New York.
Mhm.
I'm a white boy from upstate New York. Well, not a boy anymore. A white old guy from upstate New York. I came from Oswego County where it's 96, 98% white. The reason that those folks at Attica could not understand what Bobby and his wife were doing there is they never interact with Black people in Wyoming County. And so in New York State, you have people of color confined into our cities. And you get out into a rural community, and it gets worse as you go north, I can tell you that.
Mhm.
It is 95, 96, 98% white. And that continues today. Another example of the racism that caused Attica is contained in the Nixon tapes. So there's a couple of those. The first one, Rocky's kind of bragging. And by the time that the medical examiner exposes that his troopers killed all of the hostages, he's a little more chagrined and he's kind of worried about it. And so Nixon's trying to fluff him up a little bit and to tell him, oh, no, it's all right. All those prisoners were Black, right?
Mhm.
Don't worry about it then,
That's
Nelson.
what he said, right.
The public will support you.
Mhm.
This is the president of the United States
Killing
talking
Black
to the
people don't
governor of
count.
New York State, saying
Mhm.
it's okay to kill and
Black
torture
people.
Blacks.
Said it on national TV too, Joe.
Yep.
On national TV, so he can't say he didn't say it.
And to carry it forward, there was an article within the last 2 weeks that revealed that only 4% of the New York State Police Department are people of color.
4% in 2021.
4%.
2021.
And then the other one that caught my eye, because all of this is part of this Jim Crow system to control people of color and people without money or power.
Mhm.
And our criminal justice system needs to be reformed from the top down. Let me give you just one statistic to show you how it starts. The city of Syracuse, the police department, it was just revealed in our newspaper that 79% of their traffic stops are to people of color. And that's where it starts.
Mindset.
Then you
Mindset.
search them illegally, you
Mhm.
plant stuff, and you start the whole criminal justice process that ends up with 70% of our prisoners being people of color.
Mhm.
And almost every one of them being people without money or power.
That's it. That's it.
We spend, I don't know what the figure is now. I'm sure Heather and Emily and Marcia are more familiar with this, but the last time I heard, we were spending $35,000 a year to lock up a prisoner.
You talking about years ago, Joe? I think something like $65,000, $70,000 now. Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Big guy.
and we don't spend $4,000 to educate the kids at Fowler, one of the
Right.
high schools here in Syracuse.
Right.
So it's racism. And those of us who understand that need to keep saying that.
Mhm.
So I think that's really as much as I can. I got one other racist story to tell. 1975, I moved back to Syracuse. I had been in Buffalo for 4 years. I was a little bit worn out when I came back. But that summer, we heard of a Klan rally, an open Klan rally in Norwich, New York. It wasn't in Norwich, it was Earlville, near Norwich. So I went there with a Black TV reporter. They're burning crosses, and we're surveilling, and we took down a lot of license plates because, well, who are these guys in the hoods. This is 1975 in upstate New York,
Yeah.
not 50 miles from here. The Grand Clegan of the New York Clan was a sergeant at Mackinac Prison, and we busted him from that license plate study.
Oh, boy.
So Attica is about racism,
Mhm.
which continues today, and systematic white supremacy must be resisted and broken down, and we must continue to build a multiracial society because we will all be better off when we achieve that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Joe. I'm kind of speechless after all of that. It's just incredible to hear all these different perspectives, and we still have so much work to do. So I want to introduce our project manager and community organizer at Unchained, Sequoia Kemp. And we're going to open things up for Q&A. So go ahead and drop any questions that you have. You can use the chat feature or put them in the Q&A feature. Both of them are buttons at the bottom of your screen there. Anything that you would like Heather or Bobby or Joe to elaborate on or to get their take on. We'd love to have a discussion with all of you.
Well, I'll just start by saying thank you all so much for your reflections for today. Bobby, I don't know. My father is Willie Kemp. He was a boxer, and I've known about the Faith and Hope Center since I was a kid, but I never knew it was yours and that you were a part of it. So I was just like, yeah. So I was like, and my nephew's into boxing too. So I just felt I just love that we have these hometown heroes. But we're in a day and age of like self-care and like community care, and basically, encouraging people who are a part of radical justice movements to take care of themselves. And so, the comment you had made about like, you can't do anything about your pain because it's 50 years ago. But I was curious to know, how have you and others found, what has it been, or have you done any like care work around healing from the experiences you all had at the yard?
You said for healing, you said?
Yes.
For me, my healing is working with young guys, trying to keep them from where I went at as a young guy, because most guys in communities like mine, we think going to prison is a rite of passage. That makes you a man. So every Black young guy wants to be that guy. He wants to be a man. So we think going to prison is what college really means to Black young kids today. Mm-hmm. That was our rite of passage. That was made us accepted in the hood. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that we received is for any of you, how do you think the public perception of Attica and what happened that day has changed over the years, or has it changed at all?
Overall, my personal opinion, from what I experienced the other day, I don't think things changed really that much. And especially after this last election with our last president, how there's still some people who said it wasn't a fair election, it was a cheated election, but so it's really confusing. And then it's brought all this hate back again. Mm-hmm. Separation. Mm-hmm. In the late 70s, maybe a little bit of the 80s, we were coming about with the hippie era, we call it. You know, people was loving and caring for each other, stuff like that. So all of that's been taken away from us and stuff like that. You know, and that was a mood swing. But after this Attica thing, things just flipped again because it was us versus the system again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I said, it's a rite of passage for a young guy to go to prison and make it out whole. But we also know it's a hell pit.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know it's almost like an adventure
Yeah.
to go in and come out whole again. You know, otherwise with a peace of mind that you can actually function a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like we're having a conversation today, because a lot of guys go to jail, just like your husband there, Emily. He's strong mentally.
Mm-hmm.
Most guys go to jail, just like I did, thinking that size made a man, you know, muscle and toughness and F you up. But then there's some guys who go to jail, like Brother George, like Brother LD, and I see that in your husband's sis. They go there and they explode up here.
Mm-hmm.
That real muscle and that brain opens up to make people do the unexpected. I don't know your husband. I don't know how long you've been with him, but I bet you he wasn't like that all of his life, or he wouldn't be in prison now to see the light that he's seen. But now that he sees the light, there's people that's not going to want him out because he becomes a threat, because then they become 20 to 100 of him, because the world is full of followers.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want people to follow guys like that. They didn't want people to follow guys like me.
Mm-hmm.
I heard someone use that word, a hero. I don't see myself as a hero, but I see myself as a community fighter.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been, not just about people who look like me in my community. See, you can ask anybody in my community. I'm one that don't judge people by their color, because see, if you look at me and look at the texture of me, see, I know there was some shenanigans going on in there in my family tree,
Mm-hmm.
whether by force or choice. I don't know, because I wasn't there. I wasn't born yet. But I know there's people who don't look like me that's in my family. You know, maybe slave masters, I don't know, whatever it was. So I don't think I never grew up hating white people as a whole until I got around those who showed me that they were uncivilized people,
Mm-hmm.
acting like people. The animals that they called me, I seen them as that same animal, because a lot of times those that bark and talk the loudest, they're the worst ones. And so that's what, as I became of age, and Attica itself said, I'll never go to prison again.
Mm-hmm.
Because now I know I was on this plantation and I'm helping these guys to oppress people who look like me. And then those who see me as a person in the community that's trying to pick other people up.
Mm-hmm.
If they're following me, I can't do nothing. I know those guys are trying to do the same thing I'm doing, and they'll make it further than I did. So there'll be some of us that escape.
Mm-hmm.
And this, like I said, this is, it's a way for me to vent and take some of that pain off. Because like I said, I never psychologically got any help for that war I went through.
Mm-hmm.
No one seen that as war, but it was war for 5 days. Imagine this. Being around killers, rapists, everything, the filth of the earth they call prisoners. And that's what we were in. You had prisoners being held prisoners by other prisoners in a prison, then being those prisoners that's watching other prisoners and that shenanigans of 5 days just doing what the F you want to do, how you want to do it, when you want to do it. No one can stop you, because now only the strong survive. That's what Attica was. Imagine that for 5 days, not being able to sleep because the guy next door might decide he wanted to pay me a visit because he don't like the way we look, or we're from upstate, they're from downstate. So it was free plucking of stabbing guys getting to the, they don't talk about those things, that when guys take care of 10-year-old beasts, now we're all in the same yard. No one can stop us now, and you can't hide.
Mm.
So there was a war going on out there. There was carnage going on out there that people didn't talk about. See, I'm talking about the whole thing. This thing exploded because people got tired of being mistreated and not treated like human beings. But once we got into those days, guys started taking care of those personal beasts. So if you're talking about pain, you're talking about fear, put yourself in that Attica environment where there's guys that's hunting each other, trying to kill each other in a yard while guys are watching the whole yard with guns and stuff. So, you know, that was hell on earth and stuff. That's the worst kind of war you could be in, because if you weren't prepared with skills of knowing how to take care of yourself, you was a victim.
Mhm.
And I've seen some, like I said, I seen some foul crap done in those 4 or 5 days and stuff like that. You know, I don't wish that hell or that pain on nobody else, or have to visualize life like that to wake you up and say, I'm not coming this way anymore. Talking about going to jail, because I've seen hell on earth. I've seen what jail really is when there's no one of security around to keep us away from hurting each other and stuff like that.
Mm. Thank you, Bobby. Heather, I see your hand is up. Did you want to answer this question as well?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really important question. And thank you, Bobby, for sharing that. I'm really just so struck by, just first, I just want to respond to Bobby, because I think that it's just such a reminder how much trauma was wrought by what was unleashed, that, you know, what was unleashed both before that ever happened in those institutions, and what's still being unleashed, but also what was unleashed on that 5th day. And, you know, I just think we need to really, we really need to process what you're saying, because for that there has still not been any atonement, and for that there has still not been any justice. And I do think that we really need to hear that, because, you know, part of the answer to the question that was asked is because there was never any justice for that, despite the fact that there was a tremendous legal battle, despite the fact that there was, you know, and thank God for that legal battle, and thank God for the modicum of justice that could be won in that courtroom or courtrooms, and in the civil manner. You know, at the most fundamental level, the trauma that was wrought, you know, there is no justice for that. You know, that what was robbed can never be repaired. And I think that we have to just, you know, we have to process that. We have to reckon with that. And the fact that it's still going on for all the reasons that Joe said, because it is fundamentally about white supremacy, because it is fundamentally about the inhumanity of racism. I think that is inescapable. And yet I do want to say that to the question about what does it all mean, or where does it leave us, or where does Attica leave us, I do want to say that it is kind of extraordinary to me how, if you would have asked even 10 years ago, did anybody know what had happened at the Attica Uprising? I think the answer would have been that very few people knew. And I do think it is really extraordinary how many people actually do know now. And it is a real testament to you, Bobby, and to all of the Attica brothers who have come together to really speak loudly about what happened 50 years ago. I think this 50-year marker has been a real reckoning. I think people have spoken loudly. I think there's a whole lot of young people that know exactly what happened at Attica now that didn't know 10 years ago, number one. And I actually think that what happened in 2020, what happened in, you know, last summer, what happened the summer before, I think all of George Floyd's summer mattered a lot. I think the uprising at the St. Louis jail mattered. I think what happened at the uprising at the Manhattan House of Detention mattered. I think what happened in the prison strikes in 2016 mattered, in 2018 mattered. And in many respects, I think that 2021 resembles 1971 in a way that we haven't seen in 50 years. And in some respect, it gives me more hope than we've had in 50 years, because the movement today, you know, leave aside what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, and leave aside the brutality that still goes on inside every day in those institutions, just for this 1 second while I say what I want to say. You know, people turned out night after night after night in the streets, and the crowds that turned out and the youth that turned out was a multiracial crowd, a multi-generational crowd, a relentless crowd that was not going to go home.
Yeah, they don't know who kids there out there.
And that crowd was turning out behind the bars. It was turning out in the streets. And I got to say that that tells me that January 6th did not quite reflect what's going on in the nation. And for all of that trauma that you experienced the other day at Attica and standing out in front of that prison, Bobby, which breaks my heart, and it does reflect everything that Joe just said, it does not reflect, I hope, where we're at. And I think actually people do know that Attica is all of us. And I actually think that we're in a different chapter, or I hope that we are. But I will just say one more thing, and then I'm going to be still, which is that what Joe said actually matters. It isn't on the people who've suffered that trauma to fix this. It is on the community that caused this to fix this. And this goes back to what Joe said. The people that cause this harm have to fix this.
Yeah.
And the people that cause this trauma have to fix this. And that is about taking those hard conversations back to those dining room tables at Thanksgiving and Christmas. And it's about white people fixing this, which is about causing the harm that they caused. And that's me, and that's every other person. So in that sense, it's about the hope is taking it to reckoning with white supremacy is about white people actually reckoning with this. So I do think that we're hopefully taking this forward in a new way, in a good way, that more people know about Attica. I'm hoping, but yeah, that could be, let's talk in 50 years, whether it was
Let's
right
be
or
here,
wrong.
huh?
Right, Bobby?
Let's be in here. Yeah, that's the job itself. Yeah. Yeah.
Marsha, I saw that you raised your hand. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, just briefly, hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be the president of the board of directors of Unchained, this feisty, powerful organization that's doing amazing work. And I can't say enough about the difference it makes having leadership from Derek, who is, as you heard, incarcerated. We learn things from him that we wouldn't otherwise know. But just very briefly, and I think I'm taking off on a point that Heather made. Like Joe Heath, I was a graduate student in 1971. And my introduction to the criminal justice system was through becoming a volunteer, if you will, working on the Attica cases in the ways that I could. And it was a transformative and eye-opening experience in so many ways, and changed the trajectory of my life in terms of like being, I won't say committed, but just having to take up the struggle for the reform of the criminal legal system. But one thing I think it's important to know and to think about the connection from 1971 to 2021. Upstate has always had challenges in terms of political activism because of its domination of by white people and white elites, and by the particular way that that domination has oppressed communities of color in upstate New York, right? But the response to Attica in virtually every upstate urban community where there always has been, well, maybe not always, but long time has been strong communities of color, was to form community-based advocates supporting the brothers, right? And it was a very empowering, multiracial multi-generational struggle then. And there was no place, right? No event related to the trials or the appearance by Rockefeller anywhere that would go unchallenged by community voices. And for those of us who live in Syracuse, I want you to know that there was a moment, I forget exactly what year, but Rockefeller was invited by Syracuse University to give some kind of presentation. And the community shut down the streets of Syracuse. And the only way that Rockefeller could get to his speaking venue, which was somewhere downtown Syracuse, was through going through the underground tunnels that go underneath the court system. He could not show his face, right? And so it taught all of us that we have power, right? We can work together and have power. And I think that you see that even more so in 2020 and 2021. And there were the seeds of that in 1971, gifted to us who were not living through Attica like Bobby was, right? Through the strength and the power of their resistance. And it has blossomed into what we see today.
Thank you, Marsha, for those additional comments. I wanted to highlight one of the questions. As y'all see, I'm wearing one of the CUSE Youth BLM t-shirts, and they formed about, I think it's about 2 years ago or last year during following George Floyd, but also they've been fighting for change in the Syracuse school district around policing, around investing more money. And so one of the questions that was asked is, how can I, or the individual, how can students actively fight for change in their schools and also in their community? And that's for anyone to answer.
Can I just say for 2 seconds, know your history. You know, I will just be such a biased professor here, but there is a remarkable reinventing of the wheel that just goes on generation after generation after generation. And I'm going to be that boring teacher that nobody ever wanted to take, but God help me, history is not boring. It is inspiring. It is, you know, it gives people the strength to get up in the morning and get out of bed and do it and take chances and take risks and know that what you're doing is going to make a difference. And I don't mean the kind of history that you just click on in historychannel.com or, you know, it is the kind of history that is it's the untold history. It's the history that's not in the archives because nobody wants you to know about it. It's the history. Joe mentioned, you know, 13 years to write this Attica book. Well, I couldn't have written it without people like Bobby and Joe because it's the history that wasn't in the archives. You know that the Attica records still aren't released. They're still not released because there's no statute of limitations on murder. They don't want those Attica records released. So, you know, one of the reasons why I reached out to Joe was like, Joe, is this right? Like, you know, is this what happened in the trial? Is this what happened on Monday? Is this what happened on Tuesday? Like, those are the kind of histories you got to read because you got to know like what happened, because then it'll inspire you to like, oh, so now when we go out in the street, now I know that this is going to work, right? I know that this is going to make a difference. And there are so many histories like that out there. So I would just say, know that history, get inspired by it, and then make your own history. And then they got no power because there's a hell of a lot more of you. Just do the math. Know your math too, which is I was never very good at that part. That's why I became a historian.
Well, I think people should also understand that when we work together, we have much more power.
Much more.
You know, in order to end the criminal prosecutions and to get the governor of New York to stop all prosecutions of Attica Brothers because of selective prosecution, That only happened because tens of thousands of citizens worked for years and years
Mhm.
to achieve it.
Yep. Yep.
We did the same thing a few years ago when we beat back big oil and gas and kept fracking out of our state. That was hundreds of thousands of people. And so the power is with the people.
Mhm.
So there are organizations like Unchained that are doing great work. There are organizations in Syracuse that are working to try to fix this horrible racist police department that we have.
Mhm.
The first thing would be to require that every cop lived in the city. Because right now we have an occupying army that comes down from that same Oswego County.
Some suburbia, right? Whatever side, yeah. Mhm.
And then when they hire one black guy who's doing great out there playing
With the
ball
kids,
in
right.
in the city, and then they vamp on him.
They call him a gang member
They call him a gang member.
because he was doing good work.
Yes. So we have a lot of work to do here in Syracuse, and we do it best when we work together across racial lines.
Mhm.
One other struggle that's related to this is the removal of the Columbus Monument from the middle of our city.
Yes.
And a bunch of old white guys who
Slave
used to
owner.
run the county thinking that they still have the right to tell everyone else what to do.
Slave
Right.
owner.
Columbus was the beginning of the trans-African slave trade.
Mhm.
Yes.
He
No.
also unleashed the horrible genocide of indigenous peoples.
Mhm.
So Heather is right.
Indians, yeah.
Learn the real history.
History.
Mhm.
And then come together and work together in groups in our community and make a difference.
Mhm. That's right. I love the youth. So if you are a youth in Syracuse, yes, please reach out to Unchained if you're looking for ways to just help educate the community and get more informed. We have just a few more questions. Specifically, Bobby, it says, how can the community change prison as a rite of passage for young city kids?
We got some work in front of us when it comes to that because this stuff has been instilled over the years. So it's
Mhm.
not going to just happen overnight. For people like myself to get an opportunity to have a voice and to speak because I was muzzled. Like a dog that bites, they put a muzzle on me before I couldn't speak to young folk because I was a positive person and I know that in my community. My community knows who I am.
Mhm.
And when I came out of prison after the Attica riot, my mindset and my mind thought was on that brother who was slain in California, George Jackson.
Mhm.
I never met the brother. I've seen highlights of him here and there. But from what I gather of the brother, he was trying to do what's right for people who looked like him, who didn't understand how the system was using us as modernized slaves and pitting us against each other. He was telling the truth. So by him telling the truth, when that smart, educated sister he had, Angela Davis, that could spread that word to people that were free,
Mhm.
he became a threat. That's what I'm saying to you, Emily. Hold on to your husband, be there and be aware and keep him alert. He's on that plantation and they don't play fair on the plantation, sis. One day, there's guys that's gonna be with him. Then the next day, there's guys that will get him because the system will get to those and turn them on him.
Mhm.
So not trying to put fear in you, but keep them alert and you stay alert also and keep visiting. The most important thing to have to anybody in prison is having family members to come and give you support. Once they find out you don't have that support factor, you become a target,
Mhm.
especially if you have mindset of thinking. If when I see him about Derek, he's a thinker. So that means he's a threat. Do you hear what I'm saying? My sister, do you hear me? Emily?
I hear you, Bobby. I'm nodding. You can't see me maybe, but yes,
All right.
I hear
All right,
you.
so be on top of things and be alert. And when he hollers out, get there because they don't play by rules. And like he spoke tonight, so they know he's got a vehicle. He's got you. So he's got people that's speaking in his behalf and for him and for people like him. See, you're not this You might be the speaker for him, but you're speaking for other people like myself who don't have people to speak for them. Just like myself, I never had no one to speak out for guys who like myself who thought going to jail was a rite of passage, because I thought that was just the way things are and that's the way they're supposed to be. So why try to change things? But now that I became a man and I got grandkids and great grandkids, it's not about me no more. So I'm going to leave a positive reflection of what Black men represent, because they always say Black men don't really count. It's all about the Black woman that raises the child. My mama raised me, but I had to go to jail to find out what manhood was. And jail don't teach you what a manhood is, because it really doesn't teach you responsibility. Jail teaches you one thing: how to F another guy up. And that's not a place where any young man should want to be at, just thinking about the physical aspect of what life is all about. And like I said, once again, I thank you guys for having me on board. And if anytime that you need someone to speak about places like Attica or these plantations that we're on out here, that a lot of us think that we're free and you're not free. You'll find out once you step out of place. Or if a guy in blue happened to pull you over in front of your family, disrespect you, and you speak back because he's a policeman, you become a target, and then they beat you down in front of your family. Humiliate you, make you feel less than a man. And that happens so many times in our community. A man being brutalized in front of his family, scared to fight back, scared to talk back because he know the pain that's coming down. And a lot of times, if you have any compassion for yourself, when those moments come about you, you submit. But at that time, you lose your manhood in front of your family. And that's the worst thing that any man can do, lose respect of your family. Because that's what it's all about. Man being able to take care of his tribe. And once again, I say, I thank you guys for your time and having me on board. Thank you.
Of course. Joe, this next question is for you. What role can people in the legal system play in supporting the rights of those who are incarcerated, especially for people who are new to the legal field? They're just, looking for some ideas as how they can continue to support folks who are behind bars.
Well, almost everybody in prison needs a lawyer. They want to appeal. So you could start working in the criminal justice system. The whole system is rotten from as I said, from that first stop on the street. We have all this pushback against the bail reform. Rich people get out of jail. Poor people stay in jail for months, years before they're even have a chance of going to trial. You're presumed innocent, but you're in jail. And yet, almost every week, we get our district attorney saying, "Oh, look we've let these whoever out because of the bail reform." So bail reform is essential. Quality legal representation for criminal defendants. I don't think I've handled a serious felony trial for 25 years, but I can tell you that I spent the 25 years before that trying to elevate the level of competence of assigned counsel. It's seen as, well, I can do this and nobody holds me accountable. So we need to have better lawyers. The work that Marcia's office did in the alternatives to sentencing was invaluable and remains invaluable. Every step of this process, the reason that poor people and people of color go to prison is because they don't have defense resources anywhere near the level of white people. I forget the name of that doctor from Fayetteville who's now out 4 years after having been convicted of his wife's murder. He's got a lot of good lawyers.
That's why he's out.
So volunteer in the Alternatives to Sentencing's office, work with Unchained, work with legal aid, call the Bar Association and see if you can help with assigned counsel. And again, parole. People go to parole without any representation, and they go in there and their sentences are extended indefinitely. because they don't understand the system enough to put the right things in front of that parole board. So there's plenty of places to work because there's so much need. I'd say we maybe cover 10% of the legal need of criminal defendants. And that has a direct result of far too many people serving far too much time.
Mhm.
Everybody that goes to prison comes out.
Eventually.
So how do we want them to come out? That doesn't seem to occur to people that run the parole system. So there's so many places to plug in, and there's I'm sure that Marcia and other folks can help do that. I'm sure that Unchained I assume, could serve sort of as a gateway to help people find meaningful work. There's a great need to do better to defend people against this system.
Mhm. Thank you. Next question, Heather. How, if at all, did researching and writing your book change you or your beliefs and perceptions about this country?
Well, I'm not sure that it changed the beliefs about the country so much, because I think that was already pretty jaded, having already been a historian for a while and already having done a book on police brutality in Detroit before working on Attica. But I will say that I think it changed me completely and fundamentally. I don't think that I'm embarrassed and ashamed to say that even though I came from a family that, like so many American families, had been touched by the criminal justice system in many ways, I didn't understand it remotely. I didn't understand the way in which it makes Americans feel like it's all your own fault. It makes you feel like you're responsible for it. It makes you feel like it's all about personal failings. It's all about all the things that you did wrong, and not about a broader system that profits off of human beings and profits off of misery. And it's about racial domination and all of the things we've talked about today. And as smart as I was, and as much book learning as I had, and as much as I understood about the way American society worked, somehow I had completely missed the memo about the way in which the criminal justice system was a fundamental instrument of upholding American power relations. And it wasn't until I did the Attica book that I saw that kind of ugly face, that kind of key pillar about the way that the American power system was upheld. And, that was alarming to me. It was alarming to me that if I couldn't see it, and I was one of these people who, understood it probably better than most, as someone who studied it as intimately as I did. I mean, I like I said, I did an entire book about the city of Detroit and about Black politics in the city of Detroit, where I had grown up. I mean, that was my story. That was where I'd come from. That was my city. And I had missed it. I had grown up during the drug war. Somehow I had missed that the drug war wasn't my first boyfriend went away, did 5 years in federal prison, and somehow I missed the memo about the drug war and what was really going on. It just was kind of alarming to me. That was changing to me. It was changing to me how much trauma Attica was, and that the American people didn't even know the story. It was changing to me that everybody that I talked to broke down, and that I had somehow not understood that this fundamental thing had happened.
Mhm.
And so, of course, here it is that 15 or no, what, almost, let's see, it was 13 years when the book came out. So now it's almost 20 years. So clearly it changed me. It's now part of me, like it's part of everybody else. What it is, I always say to everybody that I meet, this is the thing that once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Mhm.
And so people will ask me now, well, is your next book going to be on prisons? You know what? Like I said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So my next book is actually about the MOVE bombing in Philadelphia. And, you know, is it fundamentally about prisons? Well, not, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's about that, and it's about everything else. So once you see it, you can't unsee it. So yeah, it changed me fundamentally.
Yes, thank you. Joe, this question is for you. And it is said, as a young law student, lawyer, what motivated you to stay the course in this long, long journey?
Well, I think it's very much like Bobby said. And I had a call last week with one of our major witnesses in our Attica trials, who is a National Guardsman. Those gentlemen were just outraged at the lack of control over the force that went in there. And once, at least some of us, once we have learned what I learned about Attica, and I spent a lot of years going into prison in the mid 70s. I could honestly say I'd been in every New York State prison there was. Now there's 10 times more. Once you know the truth, once you go into that box in Attica and have Frank Lutz explain to you the connection between slavery and what happened to the brothers on the 13th.
No different.
After that, I have an obligation to share what I've learned.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have an obligation when we learn about injustice to work against it and to speak out against it and to speak truth to power.
Mm-hmm.
And if more people understood that responsibility of citizenship, we'd have a better society. So, you know, it's only 50 years, and everybody says, well, how did you do this? How did you do that? I said, well, I don't know any better. Once you know the truth, you have an obligation. And now more people know the truth as a result of what Bobby and Heather have said this evening. And so there isn't any choice here. It's just like we can't let Exxon and whoever ruin the world. We have to stand up for what's right.
Climate control.
Climate crisis is going to kill millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
We can't allow societies that subjugate women to continue to do that. We have an obligation. And it was the Attica Brothers that taught me that obligation.
Thank you. Marcia, I see your hand is up. Did you want to add anything?
Yes, I think that I think the common thing that Bobby is saying and Joe just said and Heather said, and I said it happened to me, is that once you really take a look at the prison system in this country, if you have a shred of commitment to justice, you can't walk away from it. It becomes life-changing. And it becomes life-changing not just because of sort of the narrow questions about what should our criminal legal system looks like, but because in looking at the prison system in this country, we are really looking squarely at the abrogation of civil and human rights. It is fundamentally a civil and human rights struggle. It lays bare all of the contradictions in this country. It's not the only place we need to struggle, but in my view, there is no place where you could see those contradictions in more stark and horrifying ways than looking at the prison system and how we cage, torture, and treat largely people from communities of color, but throwing in a couple of poor white people in addition.
And let them back out in the communities, knowing that they've been warped.
Go ahead.
Can I speak to that? Like the sister just said,
Go ahead, right
when
away.
brothers are in prison, they're caged and they're tortured, they're humiliated, they're beaten down. Then they open that cage and let them back out in our communities. So when an animal's been mistreated by other animals, when he's allowed to go amongst other animals, he become wild and he become dangerous. And that's what happened to young kids who come out of prison. They've been horrified in prison, beaten down, all of their pride taken away. Then they're released back into the community, broken spirits. So what they have to do is come back into the community to prove that they're whole. They hurt other people, because now the only way they really can exist that now is back in prison.
Mm.
Jail becomes our revolving door. The only way that mind can be some kind of way controlled is being in that prison environment. They call it becoming institutionalized. And so many of us fall into that pit. And the very system, the very people that create this system, they know what they're doing. This is no incident. This is factual stuff that they've experimented on with us. We're like those rats in a cage they play with, how they experiment.
Mm-hmm.
We're human beings that they experimented on, knowing that we'll keep coming back because this is the only way we can actually function at after a while. You become institutionalized, like I said, and without being locked up with someone telling you what to do and how to do it, you don't know what to do. So when they let you back on this civilization, before you know it, you done did something to go back to where you say you don't want to be at, but you always end up back there. And the system knows that.
Mm-hmm.
You have broken spirits coming back into communities. So what they do is they hurt things within the community to be taken out again.
Mm-hmm. This question that I'm about to ask next from the gallery, it just had me thinking, as you all have been talking, I work in reproductive justice. I'm a certified doula, and I've been making so many comparisons and parallels to what I see in the hospitals with Black and brown women birthing, and just the ways that the system, healthcare system is, rooted in white supremacy. And so these conversations that we're having, that you guys are sharing, it not only can be applied to, the prison justice movement that we see and that you were a part of, but also different movements in our country. So one of the attendees was wondering, how do you think that the Attica Uprising impacted other movements that we've seen in America within the past 50 years?
Well, one of the lessons of Attica is that it's right to rebel against inhuman conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Every human being has a right to be treated with dignity and respect and not have to endure what the people in prison have to endure. So that's what's really beaten out of us all in this society. And we need to remember that we have a right, that people have a right. Just look back at what Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence while he was owning slaves, including his own children. There's also an incredibly racist reference to Indians in the Declaration of Independence. But what they said is that we have a right to rebel against this royal monarch that's treating us unfairly. That's how this country started.
Mm-hmm.
It also started with the wealth being built on slavery on one hand and stolen Indian land that's flipped for profit by land speculators. That's the basis of U.S. society, but it's right to rebel.
Mm-hmm.
We have a right to be treated as human beings. And if we work together, we can secure that right for more people.
Marsha, Heather, I see your hands are up. Either one of you can jump right in.
Well, just briefly, I would say that another important lesson that those of us who were privileged enough to be allies in the struggle for justice around Attica also really learned something that's now front and center in discussion how movements and struggles take place. And that is, it was led by directly impacted people, right? As the brothers began to get out of jail, they changed the name of the effort from the Attica Defense Committee to the Attica Brothers Offense Defense Committee. They seized their power, right? And I remember being in sort of shrinking in the corner because what did I know? But heated discussions where it was actually the brothers that were telling their lawyers how they wanted things to proceed. And now, fast forward or slow walk 50 years later, we're coming to a much better understanding that this work has to be led by directly impacted people. And those of us who want to be allies have to figure out what it means to be a good ally.
Or a good comrade in the struggle, right? Heather, go ahead. You want to add something?
I first of all, I totally want to second both what Joe and what Marcia said in terms of this comparison or what impacted Attica, or does Attica have, what lessons does it have for other movements? And I also just want to add to that I think it's really significant that, one of the reasons why Attica was so powerful at the time and why it had so much power that lasted well past the 13th of September, 1971, is that it was both behind bars and in the communities. It was a movement that resonated in both places. And it was the culmination of the activism of the 50s and 60s. It was activism that had been going on in both of these spaces for a long time. That Attica was a culmination of a lot. And so that's one really important point. And the other important point to remember is that also scared the bejesus out of the state. And that's why the response to it was so incredibly violent. It mattered. It was incredibly alarming to the state. Bear in mind, this is an uprising that happens in a state prison in a tiny town in upstate New York. And from the minute that this jumps off, there are memos going to the president, the vice president, the CIA, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, every branch of the military, the Navy SEALs. I mean, I saw the memos. It is stunning how alarmed everybody was by what is in effect happening. I mean, in a tiny town in upstate New York. Surveillance immediately starts being deployed in Oakland, in Chicago. Alarm bells are going off all over the country. At some level, I'm not even sure that the left had any clue how alarmed everybody was even at the time. How much power everybody thought that it had. And so, but that actually is really interesting because it means that in 2021, it means that what's the most power is when people work together in all communities across all of these lines, behind bars, in the community, all of the hospital workers, prison workers, community workers, daycare workers, trade unionists, like across all lines is the most powerful. But it also means that the reaction is going to be equally powerful and equally, the reaction can be very powerful. And so that leads me to my last thing, which is the reason why think about the importance of storytelling and history making. They lied. They came outside of that prison and they lied. And one of the reasons why the trauma that Bobby spoke about today was so devastating is because then the walls shut, the doors slammed, and that can never, ever happen again. These are institutions that we own. They exist at our pleasure. They could not exist if we didn't fund them. And frankly, that can never happen again. If that kind of assault ever happens again, if this kind of power ever happens again, the American people can never let those kind of stories happen again, go out again, the doors slam again without demanding entry and never letting, those kind of lies can never go out again in the name of truth and in the name of history, because that's the one lesson from Attica that we now know. Don't let other people tell our stories for us. Don't let other people tell our history for us. And I think then we know that this can never happen again.
Yeah, there's a quote that you made me think of. I forget what it says, but it basically says that when you are aware of the history, you can prepare for the future. So much of what we see, so much of policy, it is an act of resistance against the people power. And that's why, the passing of less is more. And, so much of this legislation that is trying to reform a system that it just needs to be abolished in its own way. That's why it's so important for us to push for these things, to protest, to organize, but also to change policy, because we know that from years to come, 50 years later, there was an uprising at Attica, all these policies, like you said, enacted in different parts of the country. But here we are 50 years later, being able to change policy so that hopefully 50, 100 years later from now, we will be in a better state. So I'm a huge history nerd, so I appreciate you so much, Heather, for being out here. And we have one last question, and it really relates to what's happening locally. So Barry asks, there are less than 20 local oversight entities that oversee local jails in the country, and there are over 150 oversight entities that happen over local police. And so apparently in Onondaga County, I didn't even know this, created a jail oversight entity that many of the public just don't know about, are not aware about, or for which Barry feels that it has been ignored. And so the main question is, like, how do we get people to be involved in these meetings and be a part of, these attempts to reform, attempts to have more community oversight over what is happening here in Syracuse, or just with local police? So does anyone have any thoughts or insight on what the people can do to get community involved? And
hi everybody.
So
Hi everyone. I'm Hans Manos. I'm on the board of Unchained. I love this question. I love this question for a few reasons. As the former executive director of the Philadelphia Police Advisory Commission, which is the oversight agency for the city of Philadelphia, I can tell you Barry's 100% correct. And here's the reality. The issues that exist in our jail happen to our folks that are not perfect victims in the eyes of the residents of the country. That's what we look for. If a person is mugged, the first thing we're asking is, what did they do? Were they in a dark alley? Did they have their chain out? And we're not asking the questions about how were they wrong? And so when we think about a country that's addicted to a punitive response, and we have people that we think are in jails, ergo, they must have done something wrong, there's less concern because they're not perfect enough of a victim. The second issue is transparency, right? I mean, policing is, I'll tell you, not a transparent profession, but at least what we have is the ability for your average resident to observe, maybe even with a cell phone, what is happening in policing. There are no cell phones in jail, right? There's no person that isn't already also incarcerated, unless we're talking about some civilian employees and the guards themselves. They're there to report. And as I'm sure we've highlighted here, what happens when they do report? The culture of secrecy there is tenfold from policing, which is very bad. So to answer your question, Barry, I don't know that we're going to see this until we really see folks understanding exactly how bad it is. In many ways, what we're really talking about is just making sure that we have awareness. You know, I'll talk in a few minutes about this idea, but ask the average person what a technical parole violation is. Ask the average person what's going on in jails, and they have no clue. In many ways, this is inside baseball for all of us, and I can speak to Emily and without saying many words say, yeah, you know what goes on in there, all right? And we both know the atrocities that are happening. We don't really need to outline it, but I have other friends, unfortunately, that have no clue. And when I say something like the civil rights issue of our era, of our day, is happening in our criminal justice system, many folks have no idea. So it's raising that awareness. It's certainly bringing those issues to our politicians and to our leaders and helping them understand exactly what happens in these jails and how it does impact public safety. And I'll close there. Ultimately, as Joe mentioned, public safety is impacted when people are traumatized. Public safety is impacted when people are hurt. And when we can connect those dots for people who are not sympathetic to the rest of this issue, we at least find some traction. So I'll stop there. It was really nice to chime in there. I appreciate you guys making the space for me.
Yes. And Hans, I mean, that was all the questions that we had today. The only thing I will also add is that the importance of putting place to protect people who do report. During my short time with, not short, 5 years with organizing BLM, the people want to use these systems. People want to get, awareness and justice. But the issue is they end up being interrogated, they end up being re-traumatized. So we have to also have a system in place to protect people who do report and utilize CRB. But we have 2 minutes left. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Hans, and thank you again to the panelists for allowing me to just be here in conversation with you. And thank you, Emily, for also this opportunity.
Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you, Emily. And of course, I have to say thank you to the other panelists. And I can't not say thank you to Marcia, who has been so influential in my career in life. My first job in this space was actually at my second. It was actually at CCA and the Center for Community Alternatives. And it's there where I first even heard about the atrocities of Attica. And Marcia doesn't let anyone walk in the door without explaining why she opened the place. And the conversation at Attica is the front and center. And you start saying it to your new staff when they come in, just so they understand the people and the passion that live there. I also met Emily there. And, I think at a certain point, during this call, I hear Attica and Heather, thank you as a Philadelphian, thank you for mentioning the MOVE bombing. And I say the technical parole violations. But in reality, I wonder, do people get this? I mean, at the end of the day, the police had to publicly lynch George Floyd for allies to rise up and say they want to see better in policing. Barry's comment I already spoke to, but speaks to that issue. What does it take to get there? Joe, you spoke about trauma. I can't thank you enough for the comments about trauma. And, ultimately, Derek and Emily worked together with a host of organizations locally to pass less is more, to craft less is more, thanks to Derek and Emily, to really include the voices of the most impacted in less is more. And I can't thank them enough for that, because we see too much policies that don't include the voices of the impacted. And so now there are people and families who were living in fear, who are worried about their lives being turned upside down because of a technical violation, but they don't have to do that. There are people that can seek economic justice and freedom, and they don't have to worry about that being erased by the stroke of a pen by someone who doesn't have the authority to do so, or shouldn't have the authority to do so. And so, I'll close by saying this, at CCA, so much of the work that we were trying to do and revolved around the juvenile justice, I should say my work, it was much bigger than my work, but revolved around juvenile justice and making sure that the laws in New York State changed around juvenile justice. The treatment of young people in our juvenile detention centers and our jails changed. And I'm so happy to say that, that Marcia and Emily and in small part myself were able to succeed in those efforts. But what we learned from there, what we're learning from Less is More, is that it takes not just the passage of a law, not just good advocacy, but the continued monitoring, the continued fight, the continued effort to understand what the next frontier is in this search for racial justice. So I'm so thankful to be part of Unchained because of their front and center in that fight. They're front and center of that fight in many ways nationally, but absolutely locally. And so I would like to invite you all to support them as they continue to fight for less is more implemented appropriately, as they continue to fight for racial justice, for economic justice. And we'll drop the link in the chat. Please donate as much as you can. And more importantly, ask your friends, ask your family to support these efforts, because Unchained is really doing groundbreaking work in a way that I couldn't be more proud of. So thank you all. Please consider that.
Thank you, Hans.
This is where we are. This is
Thank
about
you
where
so
we
much.
everybody's gonna depart and leave.
Yes, this is the
Listen,
part
can I
where
say-
we all part.
Can I say one more thing before we leave?
Yes,
mean,
Bobby.
Absolutely,
We talk
Bob.
about George Floyd, the big brother who they killed. What George Floyd taught us as people, there's only one race that truly mattered, and that's the human race. If you represented those marches that they had around the world last year about George Floyd, the reason why they didn't have any chaos is because it became that rainbow coalition that Jackson had spoke about some years ago. They had black and whites, they had all color of people. That's why there was no problem, no attacks, no people being brutalized in those particular marches, because there was people of all nationalities. The human race really counts. And when we come together as one, that's when we're truly Americans and stuff. That's the way I see things. Through my prison eyes, they have taught me this. The only way we can survive this war that we're in today, we as people got to come together and continue to fight. George Floyd was a pick of God, because he was an everyday Joe, as you know, doing his thing, feeling good that particular day. But God said, it's time for me to take you home, George. But what we're going to do, we're going to expose this wrong that people have been doing to people who look like you forever. And that's what made George Floyd this big event. They had people of all nationalities coming together to walk and protest of human rights for the human race, not just one race, the human race. And that's what George Floyd showed. When the human race get together as one, we're hard to beat. And I thank you again for your time.
Thank you. I think no better way to close it out than with wisdom from Mr. Bobby Harrison. So we will leave it there. Thank you, Bobby, Joe, Heather, Sequoia, Marcia, Hans. And thank you for everyone who tuned in for this conversation with us. And really look forward to continuing all the good work with everyone. So everyone have a great night. Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.